Can you hear me? Yes. Great. So I have the honor of moderating panel number 2 today, which is entitled Flip the Coin, Myth and Realities on Addressing the Ever-Increasing Funding Gap. And I have a few challenges and advantages. Challenge 1 is doing this right after lunch, especially after an Italian lunch with wine. So I will have to manage that one. The other one is coming after a very interesting first panel today. So we will try to be as interesting and as inclusive conversation. But also I have the advantage is that panel set the stage for a lot of the conversations that we are going to be having now. So thank you, that panel. This panel could also not be more timely as many of us are feeling firsthand. Not only are we facing decreasing humanitarian financing, but what many would be saying, we're actually experiencing a humanitarian financing shock, right? With the dismantling of USAID and a number of humanitarian government donors reducing their financing, as we heard now, it's the European Union ECHO, who is the biggest humanitarian donor, at around 2.8 billion, 2.7 billion. In contrast to last year, 2024, where we were already saying the world is on fire, we need much more money, et cetera, and there the biggest humanitarian donor was the US with 14 billion, right? The biggest humanitarian donor today is at the level of the 5th or 4th of last year, right? So to put these numbers in more global, last year, through international government humanitarian financing, we were at a total of 36 billion USD. The most pessimistic scenarios for government humanitarian financing, as put out in June, was 20 billion. We are today at 16 billion. And I've not heard any donor so far. I asked them this at the Grand Bargain yesterday. Have any donor is looking to increase that? Silence, right? So maybe we go up to 17, I don't know. Even more worrying, against an ultra-prioritized global humanitarian ask, the GHO done by OCHA, ultra prioritized. We were already screaming last year that it was prioritized, right? Prioritized was at 44 billion ask, ultra prioritized 29 billion ask. We are today at 9 billion. 9 billion. And I mean, we can also start to look at where is that funding going, right, towards each of the context. Therefore, we need to obviously do something about this. So as you know, there's a humanitarian reset and other processes looking at how to make that 9 billion more efficient. We've put a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of local and national NGOs and saying, you can get us out of this mess, right? As the last panel was talking about in terms of Indonesia, right? But we also need to look beyond government humanitarian donors. And we have to be, but this is why also this panel is very timely, because we cannot afford to waste our time going after funding sources that don't make any sense, right? And Michelle, again, thank you again for the very interesting sort of scenarios, how we have to adjust our value chain, how do we become more businesses, et cetera, et cetera. That set a very good context for this panel, which I hopefully will be a bit more positive than what I said and give us some of the answers for this problem, for this 17 billion problem, and you can put it as a 32 billion problem, right? So fundamentally in this panel, we're going to be exploring different financing mechanisms from a government point of view in terms of development financing and using the IFIs and debt for development swaps. We're going to be looking at a perspective of a national NGO that has adopted very interesting funding means, social enterprises, microfinance, et cetera. And that's become, I would say, a national NGO with very strong international reach. We're going to be hearing from foundations who are fundraising from the people to give to the most ultra-local possible and how they're navigating this. And we're going to hear from the Gates Foundation and how within the health sector, they're seeing pockets of funding. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to our first panelist. The way this is going to work is that we will have about 10-minute conversation with each one of the panelists, and then we'll open up to the floor. And I also want to make this as informal as possible and encourage also the panelists to ask questions of one another. Jerome Obarat, if I can start with you. So Jerome is the executive director of BRAC Global, the umbrella organization uniting BRAC's entities in Bangladesh and internationally across programming and resource generation. He spent most of his life working for Médecins Sans Frontières, and as you will see, a lot of our panelists are Médecins Sans Frontières based or linked. Serving in the field, serving as director of operations in Brussels, and as Secretary General of MSF International. You've also done some work with WHO and the launching of the Global Antibiotic Research and Development Partnership. Jerome, please tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, it'd be interesting for you to give a very, very brief overview about BRAC itself. I think many of us have heard about BRAC, but interesting to have a sense of its origin, its foundation, and especially now with the current funding crisis, how has BRAC felt this, if it has felt it even, if it even has felt it. Jerome, over to you as the first question.
Great, thank you very much, Elise. And I want to apologize, and also enter source, but I want to apologize to translators because I tend to talk very quickly. I might have some Italian origins somewhere, but I'll try and slow down because, I do run through my text. But basically, a first caveat about BRAC. We're not a typical, what you would typically define as a frontline humanitarian organization. In fact, our experience is not drawn from conflict response, and the majority of our work is what people would call development, and certainly not at the eye of the storm of the emergency. Yet, it's exactly where we began. In 1972, BRAC was born out of the aftermath of the Bangladesh Civil War, but also the devastating Bola cyclone that actually killed hundreds of thousands of people. And this is where the organization grew. First of all, as a relief organization, responding to famine, displacement, so very much a lot of what we are facing today. And what the founders saw was actually those that were most affected, in particular by the Bola cyclone, but also the Civil War, were the poor. So you saw a direct correlation between those that are most impacted by the acute emergency, and that was definitely one of his guiding views as he launched the organization. But yet, more than 50 years later, we've nearly come full circle in terms of what we're seeing. A growing share of BRAC's work in Bangladesh, and here I'm talking about Bangladesh because we're operational in 15 other countries, is more and more directly linked to humanitarian interventions. Much of this is because of the climate crisis, which we haven't talked much about here, but was mentioned, I think, by Miro in the morning, where there's a collapsing reality between what is the kind of development rhetoric and what is the humanitarian rhetoric. And it's really impacted all aspects of our work. And we draw our experience from not being in the eye of a punctual storm, but certainly within the heart of a very structural emergency. So if I give you a bit of the illustration of what Bangladesh is today, despite being on the verge of actually qualifying as a middle-income country, Bangladesh is the fourth most insecure country in terms of absolute numbers of food insecurity. So that's actually something that's gone through the roof in the last 3-4 years. Every year, something like 500,000 to 750 million people migrate to the city of Dhaka, one of the most densely populated city in the world. This is like adding the city of Florence or the city of Leeds or the city of Marseille year on year on the city of Dhaka with everything it represents behind it. And those are arriving in full destitution. On top of that, you've got the regular shocks that we have to actually cater for due to Bangladesh being stuck between the melting ices of the Himalayan, the raising seas of the Bay of Bengal, and everything that brings in terms of the shocks. But on top of that, we have one of the largest structural refugee camps, which is Cox's Bazar, hosting the Rohingya refugees. And just to add to all this, it is the most densely populated country in the world. So you're catering with refugees, you're catering with internal displacement, you're catering with continuing shocks day in, day out. But what is actually very much hopeful in how things have been happening is that there are solutions. And I think the resilience, the creativity of what's happening on ground level is actually a return, and it's been mentioned this morning, that should really be valued for the rest of the world. I mean, in essence, if Bangladesh makes it out of this climate crisis, the rest of the world has a chance. If it doesn't make it, there's a big question mark. And the innovation happening at ground level is critical and should be recognized as potentially an asset and a financial return. Now, how does BRAC work? For us, it's equally important to look at the human capital, and this probably joins some of the things that you were saying this morning, Michel, and the financial capital. One without the other is just not going to cut it, and that human capital, the capacity, the knowledge, the skill, and the agency of people to turn the resources into results. Now, focusing on one without the other is a missed opportunity, and I think it is probably the weakest thing of the current aid architecture. So BRAC model really works on the two fronts. On the financial side, generating the capital, but on the human side. On the financial side, from the beginning, it was seen as we were shifting out of the emergency phase into a much more development phase, that you bring in resources into a village, a cow. Quite quickly, there's too much milk in the family, there's too much milk in the community, and we saw the need to actually link the production to the market and ensure a fair price. This led to social enterprises, and this was back in the 80s, that actually started generating income and fair income for the farmers. But also, it was a business. It was a business that was run and had to be competitive within the market. Similar for seamstress, artisans that actually were connected from the village into the urban markets, which were actually the connection that enabled the value chain to actually work. And this is what today, you fast forward 40 years after the creation of some of those social enterprises, BRAC Dairies is number 1 or 2 in a country of 170 million in terms of dairy production, your corner milk and so on, yet it's owned by an NGO. And so the profits go back into staying competitive, but are reinvested into areas where social programming is simply not sustainable, which will be education, which will be health, which will be emergency response and services. So you have the same thing for seeds and agro, where actually with the shift in Bangladesh, we needed to find new ways of producing seeds that were salinity tolerant, wind resistant. So we have research labs, and we actually produce seeds that enable smallholder farmers to actually get greater yields, have, again, more for their money in terms of how they're working. So this whole ecosystem that BRAC sees is not just an NGO, it's actually a solutions ecosystem that is ready to use anything that works for those that are most marginalized and poor, keeping the bottom line being owned by a social mission and not a financial purpose. But just to be very clear, we can generate a lot of resources, but this doesn't cover it all. We do need the bilaterals, we do need the private funding, the grant funding, but it does give you that proportionality that, again, I think you mentioned this morning, Michel, where you're not completely dependent on one source. You're able to actually create bridges between the different types of reality that you face, and you're also able to innovate in view of the acute challenges that you face at ground level. On the human side, as importantly, we see agency as the ultimate resource. Now, each person we work with is not seen through the lens of a beneficiary, but seen through the lens of a potential producer, of a caregiver, of a potential teacher, of an entrepreneur. That's the way actually you engage from the beginning. And when people's capabilities are unlocked, they start driving the system forward. And actually, a lot of the work that you do at ground level is about giving the confidence that, yes, you can move forward and you can engage with the broader system and communities you're in. Now, within all this, we've identified for years that actually women are the main change agent that we work through, not just because there's they're often at the greatest need within the communities we work with, but also because actually they make the best decision for the household, which is something that is recognized fairly widely. So the community, the individual really becomes a force for change. Now, overall, to your question about how the so-called funding crisis has or not weakened BRAC, I would certainly say that if you look at the big picture, it's, of course, impacted the ground level reality, but it hasn't impacted BRAC as an organization because we're diversified in terms of where our income is coming. But interestingly, probably something that will impact or is going to impact BRAC in a different way are the tariffs. So everyone's focusing on the USAID reality, but what's going to create more harm at the ground level in terms of the reality? It's not just the funding, it's actually also the punitive systems that are around those that actually already feel the brunt of inequality the most. So because of investing in different approaches, I think it's interesting to explore these other models, because BRAC is probably the big example. But a lot of national organizations, local organizations, CSOs, I actually find the kind of local versus global obnoxious personally. If you sit in Bangladesh, you're local. If you sit in New York, you're global or you're international. I mean, we've got to see things in a completely different way. A lot of smaller organizations that are invisible to everyone actually already bridge the social solidarity at community level and other areas. And I don't think we've been really looking at these organizations that often actually are invisible and even, I would argue, hidden behind the big logos of the so-called sectoral deliverers, which is you do something, if the UN can put it in their books, they'll put it in their books. You create a capacity where you need to fundraise. So we're not going to talk about the small local NGO, we're going to be talking about, ACF, CARE, or even BRAC, because that's what you have to do to kind of show yourself. So I think there's a shift in terms of actually bringing the invisibility out. So that's what we've actually taken also in the 15 programming countries, that intrinsic link between that capital, which is financial, and that capital, which is even more important, which is the human side, and the communities at ground level.
Jerome, really thank you so much for that. There's a lot in there to unpack further. But maybe just to take one small point quickly, is you talked a lot about managing diverse funding streams, right? You talked a lot about the skill set to be able to bridge into different worlds, bridge into different conversations with development actors, private sector, et cetera. If you were to advise a national NGO here in Burkina, for example, as we were hearing from our colleague earlier today, what type of skills or expertise do you think needs to be built in these national NGOs for them to be able to really successfully adopt social enterprise models, work in the area, so to really take advantage of this human capital, as you were saying, which I think they do somewhat naturally in a grant logic. Right. But how can you translate that into a revenue generating logic?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question, and it's not an easy one because I think also this morning's panel, each context will be different, and you can't just cookie cut and paste these realities so easily across. But there's a few areas that we really need to see how we can bridge the gap. I mean, for one, let's face it, ODA, rightly or wrongly, isn't where excess capital sits today. We've talked about the oligarchs and so on of this world. I mean, if you're really looking at where the excess capital sits today, it's way beyond the ODA funding. However, there is still a lot of money that's being held or is being controlled by government. But what they're looking at is most of the time capital multipliers, that each euro can go further or each dollar can go further. So they are looking at ways in which you need to be going beyond your sectoral kind of jargon and really looking at how you can connect into a broader kind of reality. So get out of the silo is probably the first thing. And, again, don't become, and of course it's a bit the anecdote that was said this morning, a little Frankenstein. There's other ways of doing it in how we're going to be moving. Second, we need to be thinking about adaptive systems, and the whole difference. And when I paint the reality of Bangladesh, let's face it, it's going to be the reality of many places coming. We need to stop about we're doing one thing, and then you got a nexus, and then you do the humanitarian. What I often say is actually we're in a world where those two worlds are increasingly interconnected, and it's not a nexus, it's an accordion that you've got to be able to play seamlessly, or actually the instrument in South Asia is called much more aptly a harmonium. You know, we need harmony across sectors. We need harmony across the private, the public, the NGO, the humanitarian, the development. And we need to understand, of course, there's needs for skills. And I think, you know, the message that, you know, it's just got to be the global south that's going to get out of it is not completely true. But for the moment, 90%, 95% of the resources are controlled by the global north, when 95% of the work is being done by the global south. So there's, you know, a proportional disparity which we see across all sectors. You go to a COP, what do you see? Those creating the problems, those holding the purse are those making the decision, and there's not a proportional representation around the table of those most impacted income or what the decision outcome will be. So I think, you know, not accepting that you're just going to be that 5% in the room, that tokenism is also going to be very important, I think, going forward. Then thirdly, I think the whole learning, evidence, data, and how to translate all that learning, evidence, and data into actionable evidence. But you know, I mean, there's some concrete example. For instance, also how to spend money. We've done a lot of work with donors which actually liked, you know, Christopher used the word about getting rid of the layers, which was unpronounceable. But anyway, that is actually very attractive to donors today. So we've set up a pool fund mechanism in Cox's Bazar because we're seeing actually the reduction in funding. We're seeing the actors, international actors go, which has been funded by the Canadians, the Australian mainly, and a few others, where we capacitate national CSOs and NGOs to take on the work through on-the-job coaching, but also investing in their overheads. Because, you know, it's easy to say they're corrupt, they can't manage. Well, why? Because all the funds gone to New York, Paris, and Geneva. And, you know, there's a catch-up that has to be played, and donors have to accept that the flexible funding, the overhead funding, is a good investment. And a bad investment is purely the hard-end delivery, which actually the layered system forces onto the local at the end. So again, not to accept that you will, I know it's difficult not to accept money in this kind of world, but, you know, not to accept that you will take the money without at least saying, but you're not investing in me. You're not investing in my capacity to actually not be potentially corrupt, not be potentially missing critical issues, because I can't invest in myself. So when you look at the investment that we did in the localization mechanism in Cox's Bazar, we disbursed 10 million over the course of about 3 years and capacitated 27 national NGOs. And, you know, more than 80% of those funds were spent directly in programs, in delivery. And actually, it was a 40% more cost efficient than at the ground level UN delivery system. So there's obviously something to look at. And then of the 27 NGOs, 23 of them have gone on to become primary recipients from major donors because we invested in their overhead capacity, in their governance structure, showed them how, you know, it could be done. They found their way as well. So the so-called risk of funding local turned into capacity, you know, and I really question we face this in BRAC. You're local, you can have 5% overheads, and the international organization can have 12% overheads. To what? Carry on funding New York? To actually carry on funding the excessive prices that go to private consultancies? Well, on the front end, you know, 5% won't even get you a kind of training center that you need to keep your people going. So I think there's a lot there also that we've got to unpack in terms of moving forward. But I'm going to end because you might have another question. I don't know how much time we've taken. But, you know, the reality of also the return on investment. So in MSF, I worked a lot on HIV. Yes, of course, some of the products came out of the biotechs of the global north, but the delivery model that made a seismic shift in terms of HIV no longer being an epidemic today and being under control since the early 2000s is actually from global south ingenuity approaches where, due to necessity, it was shifted from the doctor-led model to actually a patient-empowered model. And actually, what did it show? Much better results than actually the doctor-led model, which now has been taken up all over the world, including the US. Has there been a return on that investment or recognition of that saving that then's been reinvested into countries? No. But if we don't manage to make that link, when you look at the climate crisis, it's exponentially more complicated than what the HIV epidemic was. And if we're not ready to to recognize that those at the heart of the storm are going to be bringing the solutions that will allow us to survive tomorrow, we're missing the point in terms of global. It's even more than global solidarity. It's even more than saying, this is good for me. This is about survival in terms of where we're going tomorrow, because at the end of the day, Plato, so I think we have a Greek DG here, did coin somehow necessity is the mother of invention. There was another word to it, but necessity is the mother of invention. And it's not in our comfortable reality sitting here that we're going to be able to really find the new solutions to acute problems. Same thing for Gaza in terms of the medical reality. Same thing for the realities in Ukraine in terms of the creativity of what's happening on the ground, because you'll see that the national NGOs tend to be the ones, as Christopher was saying over lunch, that are going to be at the hardest end and the harder to reach end of the conflict, not in the more comfortable areas where actually the international NGOs will be.
Jerome, thank you so much. I think, Costa, you have your topics for the next 3 or 4 humanitarian conferences going forward, humanitarian congresses. A lot, so much in there to unpack further. I am going to turn now to Benoit, though, and I'm sure I'm going to ask you as well, and I saw Andrew as well nodding his head a number of times, so I think there'll be a lot of thematics to what you said, Jerome, that'll come back out further. Benoit, first of all, let me introduce you. Benoit de Cries, did I get it? Did I get it? Is the current executive director of the Netherlands Refugee Foundation. And SV, which you see their logo, was up here as one of the sponsors of this Congress. You have a very long background, including in the sector, notably with Médecins Sans Frontières, and also INSO. And you are also currently on the board of MSF Belgium. The Netherlands Refugee Foundation, but you'll tell us more about them and what they do, but started, I think, in 1952 around, post-World War II, in terms of trying to galvanize individual giving to help refugee and displaced persons. And I think now you really are looking at investing in the ultra-local, right? The emergency response rooms in Sudan, and really trying to get money as close to the front lines as possible. So in that logic, sorry, I'm losing where my notes are. in that logic, please tell us, how has this funding shock hit you? How have you seen the appetite in terms of individual giving? You do have some institutional giving as well. So how has that hit you in terms of your own fundraising efforts? And how do you see it playing out when you're investing in the ultra-local?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Intrusos, for the invitation to be here. I was listening to you, Jerome, and I thought maybe I should just here, and then get it over with, because a lot of things that you mentioned resonate really well with us. Maybe just to start very practical, because it's about financing. So this week I had a meeting with one of our new donors, not an institution, but another foundation. Actually, I'll tell you about our model later. So I didn't know that person, and I was preparing a bit like, how do I approach the conversation with him? And of course, one of the questions I'm asking him is like, well, why would you support Stichting Vluchteling? And that's how you say it in Dutch, Netherlands Refugee Foundation. Why us, but also why the type of work that we do. So what we do globally, we work in about 30 humanitarian crises, where we work through partners big and small, to try to help support people on the move as adequate as possible. So I asked him a bit, look, what are your drivers? Why are we having this conversation? Why are you willing to, in this case it was a retired businessman, why are you willing to share with us your money? And he related to images that he had seen of DRC, where I was myself also about a year and a half ago. And he saw the stories, what happened around Goma with M23. And also he was just reflecting, he was a grandfather, he said, look, just the thought that I would be in that situation, not being able to support my grandchildren, that alone is enough for me to give money. And I think what I took from there was just a rich person saying, I want to give back, I want to show solidarity. And for me, that was the cue then to say, okay, is the solidarity then to give classical aid, like a tent, a shelter, or is there also a sense of justice or actually addressing injustice? Because as we have a tradition of being quite hands-on, life-saving emergency, but we're also moving more and more to the question, how do you position yourself as an organization within a fundamentally unjust world? And just purely being humanitarian, I've indeed worked a long time with MSF, and that hands-on, that really was for me the motivation. Now in my current position, I'm also thinking, what is the role as a humanitarian organization within the system, and how much do we advocate around that, right? And I was wondering, can I have that conversation with this donor, because maybe he just wants to give and be a do-gooder, or is he more on the sense also of trying to correct some of the structural injustices? And the more we talked, the more I felt there was a larger conversation. And he said, I want you to do things that help these children, these families, but also give them a chance for the future. And then when we talked about addressing malnutrition, stunting has impact on life, has long life impact. So he said that's very fine. He talked about repairing fistula of SGBV violence cases. Education, of course, that's also, but also vaccination. So for him, the thinking was you help them, but also with a bit of a longer term impact without necessarily going into the whole nexus conversation. So for me, that was really interesting, because I really fundamentally believe that in the Netherlands and in many countries, there are a lot of people that, especially now in the current day and age where there is a political will to destroy and undermine civil society, of which we're all part of, we need to be bold enough to activate these people, not by the classical give now and do good, but actually entice them to think more, and even and that will be the conversation. We need to see how far we can go, but with these donors to say, look, you're also a counterweight to what's going on. And I know that there's a lot of things that was said already before, and now I have a lot of notes scribbled down, but right now, obviously the main goal for SV, we're a foundation, but we have about 80% private funding, 20% comes from foreign affairs, Netherlands foreign affairs. So obviously the main goal is now to preserve our income. We do that by, having the conversation that I just described. Many of our donors, actually, if you call them and say, look, these are dire times, would you consider giving more? The response rate is generally very positive, because people see what's happening and they're not blind. And a lot of the conversations we're having in the Netherlands is also, how do you have meaningful interactions? I think too long NGOs have treated individual donors as, sorry for the word, cash cows. You just, but you need to have a more meaningful conversation with them. I think for that, also our fundraising strategies, we need to be focusing a little bit more beyond just the classical life-saving help now and feel good narrative. So getting that, that critical support, if you want. And two things we were trying to do. On the one hand, in the operational side, yes, we're trying to see where can you have the most impact. And we've been indeed testing with emergency rooms in Sudan, where we actually see that the overhead is 5%, which is nothing. The accountability, both in data, is fantastic. We've seen the dashboards that the emergency rooms and the coordination rooms are using. So the data accountability is there, but also the community accountability. So really that accountability from the community. And I liked what Yves, you were saying before, that if a foreign, I was going to say foreign agent, but that doesn't sound right. If a foreign actor comes in and gives something, then population will say thank you. That's not accountability. But if you have local people and you ask them, this power shifting, if you ask them, what do you need, and you have this community engagement, and then from the community you help, that accountability level is just so strong. So these emergency rooms, data accountability and community accountability. And that really encourages us to try more of those approaches, which is basically low overhead, that's efficiency. But also for us, we're thinking, well, can we, in this day and age, potentially be also the middleman for other organizations? Can we be very lean and mean? And for example, do submissions of proposals with some of our partners. So that's, in the one hand, we're trying to go as local as we can. The other one, and that's really, maybe then I'll stop. One of my big concerns right now is that in the current funding crisis, if you want, I'm afraid that a lot of organizations will be forced to reduce on their advocacy and their communication. And that's where right now we're investing a little bit as well in our organization to not lose that advocacy component. Because being on the field but not, have the témoignage, MSF would say, I think that's impossible. And that's really what I found the risk now. We've seen in the US how quickly some organizations took down their websites around environment, around LGBTQI+ rights. They disappeared overnight in an attempt to preserve funding, right? And for me, that's extremely worrying. We've seen other signals, and I'm not saying that these are right choices or wrong choices. Well, I think they are wrong choices from a principle, but I understand you have also your responsibility to your staff and your project, and I understand that. But there is a risk that more and more, if we go in that line, we will lose speaking out, we lose advocacy, we will invest in compliance more just to get some money, and we'll be less critical. So we'll become a government organization. The N is dropping out. And I think that's what I would like to preserve with our organization, not alone, but in partnership with all our partners. We would like to also get the voice of the communities and the local partners to resonate more. So sometimes we bring partners. So for me, that's the 3 points I'm trying to make. Sorry. One is being more explicit about how do we see ourselves as humanitarian actors within the system, and actually be transparent with our donors, because I think they will be positively responding to that. Trying to strengthen a bit the local response through a lean and mean middle management logic, and preserve our critical voice that is under threat, because I feel it's a political choice to undermine and destroy that. So these are my 3 points I wanted to make.
Benoit, in 1 minute.
Sorry.
No, it's not. You've been actually very good, but in 1 minute, because I will try to be a little bit timekeeper. Oh, sorry. Thank you. In 1 minute, because I'm a very bad timekeeper, but I'll try to be a little bit strict on this one. When you talked about the emergency response rooms in Sudan, you said we got great data from them, et cetera. I know the question on script is how do we scale giving to local and national organizations, but I want to modify the question a little bit, because how do you work in partnership with others to do so? Because I know that it wasn't just you funding the emergency response rooms in Sudan. There's been the VTOL Foundation, a number of foundations have come in. They started the Resilio Fund, and because of that support of multiple donors, they were able to create these mechanisms where they could continue to be who they are. They could get quality funding, and still they could please donors by creating external third-party mechanisms to enable them to do that. So can that model be scaled, and how do you work with other partners to do so? Yeah. In 1 minute, if you can.
First you go off script, and then I have to quickly improvise.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think first of all, the emergency rooms is a super interesting example. I think the Resilio Fund, we've been in contact with them, and they have been definitely supporting the Sudanese. But the main point is they were there before. They had created emergency rooms. They created the local coordination council, LCC. And then indeed, it's the maybe tweaking a bit on professionalism here and there, but we've seen some of the Sudanese involved, and they don't need us, to be clear. What they probably looked for was then access to these donors. And when we had these conversations with the Resilio Fund, one thing that struck to me, so Justin, who is our counterpart or contact point, he said, you know, if you as a donor are risk averse, work with the ERRs, because your accountability levels, as I just explained, are higher than what you would get traditionally with the NGOs. With the NGOs, you would have, your paperwork would be in order, but as he said, you know, in every shop in Sudan, you can get your 3 quotations for your supplies, and, you know, it looks good, but it's fake. If you are risk prone, keep working as you do with the NGOs. And I like that it was changing the narrative a little bit. So how do we work in partnership is that with some of our partners around the globe, local partners, we give them the 5% capacity strengthening, and we just say, it's for you, do whatever you want, send us a one-pager on how you used it. So that's really giving the organization the choice on how they want to build themselves, and us not telling how they should become or how they should look like us. With the ERRs, what we also have done, for example, we organized a debate with the Netherlands knowledge platform. It's called Kuno. And there we invited the ERRs, we invited the LCC and also Resilio Fund to say, look, how does it work? And we ensured that also Foreign Affairs was in the room to actually help them also rethink that narrative. Because a lot of people say, working with local organizations, you have to be really have a high risk appetite. And that's something that is so seeped in our mindset, and we can all think why that is. But that is a narrative we need to change. And you know that even if you go to the core humanitarian standards, if we really want to talk about standards, you know the first 3 ones, it's about your proximity to local organizations, give the power to them, and that's then also the narrative that we're trying to change. So for us, working with our partners is, first of all, even if we have a financial relationship with them, because we fund them, it's a reality, there is always power dynamics around that, but we're trying to separate it and really look at partnership and complementarity. So in a previous example, complementarity is, we brought a partner, also Intersos, we worked with them out of Mali, and we brought her to Parliament. Madame Terra is her name, and we just gave her the floor, and we just sat back, we just facilitated her to talk about Mali, because in the Netherlands, Mali is off the radar. So that could be an example. Complementarity is showcasing what the work is like with the ERs. So it's really not up to us to say what our role is, but to really trying to see where we could be beneficial and have a mutual reinforcing approach. That was more than a minute.
But it was perfect. Thank you very much. Excellent, perfect. Andrew, I'm coming over to you now. So Andrew Stein is the Deputy Director of Outbreaks on the polio team with the Gates Foundation, focusing on improving polio outbreak response and program innovations, including in humanitarian settings of northern Nigeria, Somalia, and Yemen. Andrew has a long experience, including working with WHO and the Center for Disease Control in Georgia, Atlanta. Andrew, with the Gates Foundation, tell us this, you are holding the sort of million-dollar question, what other funds can humanitarians tap into, right? Where can we be going? And are these other funds, these magical other funds, are they only for the big international organizations? Is there any hope that the Gates Foundation will come in and fund humanitarians? Or are you already doing so, we just don't realize it? And how could we leverage and work more, to borrow the quote Jerome said, this effect harmonium between the different funding in the health sector development. Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's nice to be with you. I wish I was there in person. I'm a little terrified seeing myself on that huge screen there behind you. Anyway, I've already learned a lot, and yeah, thanks again. Maybe just a quick background here, many of you may know the Gates Foundation's work. We've been around a little while, but have a list of, growing list of priorities, including polio, which I work on, immunization, um, malaria, agriculture, and many others. Um, we were shocked, as many of you were, on the kind of the developments in the kind of donor context over the last few months. And I think there's been a lot of, or at least a risk of kind of that doom and gloom and cynicism setting in. And I don't know, we have the luxury of being a couple steps removed from the action, unlike some of the others on the panel there. But I think where we sit, there is hope, and I think this meeting even is an example of that. This is exciting, life-saving work, and we have to continue to push and fight for the work and the impact. And so the foundation has done a number of things over the last few months. You may have heard Bill's announcement of kind of giving away the rest of his wealth over the next 20 years, and he's very optimistic on what can be done, and we he has some ideas of what we should do, and the kind of changes that need to happen. Um, what we've done as well is to try to push all of our various partners to keep the pressure on to these kind of legacy donors. They're not completely out of the mix, and even some European groups, surprisingly, even the U.S. in some small ways has not, unlike what you might see in the media, is not removed completely from this work. And I think we have to keep telling the story of the impact of the aid, and using real kind of data and analytics, and the impact of removing uh, that aid. I'd like, Jerome said this, we really need to adapt. Like anything that works, we have to diversify those funding sources. We have to pursue innovation. Um, and that comes with innovation in the fundraising and the kind of global mechanisms that kind of absorb that fundraising. One thing we've seen, even in the polio and immunization world, is the group, countries like Qatar and UAE and other kind of non-traditional partners kind of wanting to get in the mix and wanting to get involved. And that's interesting. And that's something we need to try to build connections with and relationships with. Um, there is some growth areas within this overall decline, and I think we can lean in there. Also on the global mechanisms, I'd be interested actually some others on the panel if what their thoughts are, maybe those in the audience. Um, what we see in kind of our kind of legacy partners, WHO, UN partners, they're not set up to be quite as agile as we need in this kind of financial downturn. What would a kind of global, humanitarian kind of mechanism look like where you could, you have those connections, those relationships, those um, interactions with both the legacy donors and new donors, and tell the story in different ways and plug into those local actors that I know Benoit and others, talk about. That's exciting work happening in the field. That needs to feed up to the global level in some kind of clear way so that we can reach out and tell that story and build those relationships with the donors. So, um, can there be some new organization or new mechanism at the global level to do that? It's one question I'm having. Um, I think that also requires some innovation at kind of the local level. What Benoit was talking about on kind of showing impact, the data, the communications. We, we work, you all work in very difficult circumstances, and often data is not the first thing that comes to mind. But, how can we how can we show the impact to the donors that every dollar they're giving is actually saving lives and making a real impact on the ground. And those local NGOs may need support to do that. And then lastly, how do you build more of a kind of consortium style of working at the local level? Often in economic downturns, the private sector tends to kind of merge and work. Some companies go under, and others kind of merge with companies merge together. What does that look like in our sector, at the local level, working together as kind of consortiums? Yeah, the foundation itself, to your first question, we have a small kind of emergencies unit that's run out of our global development division here. I think the foundation often leans into places that we can make big changes in the kind of structure, like global infrastructure. I think there would be some interest in kind of trying to set up systems and mechanisms to improve kind of the humanitarian kind of work more globally. We are not set up, of course, to kind of lean in at the local level so much. When we looked at the U.S. government cuts, for example, the 50 billion, 60 billion cut, we top out at, somewhere around 8-9 billion a year. And so we're nowhere near at the level to fill those gaps. But we've had discussions on how to make the most of our funding. But maybe I'll just stop there. This is great discussion, and yeah, thanks.
Andrew, I'm writing down the gates will help leverage new types of financing and have that new structure to bring this in. No, really, really thank you for that, Andrew. Maybe just one other quick follow-up question, and I'm also going to hold you to 1 minute or so, or 2 minutes or so. And I will go also a little bit slightly off script. But you were talking about that we need new language with these non-legacy donors. I like this term legacy. I'm not sure how much those organizations would appreciate being called legacy organizations. But so with Qatar and these other donors, what is your advice in terms of what is that language? What are the new ways to approach these non-traditional donors, quote unquote?
Yes. Yeah, no, it's great. And I'm not sure there's one answer. I'm not sure I have the best answers, but I would say, we're moving to a more transactional world. And that's not just the case in Qatar and UAE, this is the case in the US and many others. But that doesn't always mean, that doesn't always equal like mineral rights and these sort of things. This could be just having them sitting around the table and having that visibility on their work. And so, what we've seen in Somalia is a more recent example, is it's not just about, a kind of moral value of saving lives. It's about, can we be part of a program that has visibility, that has impact, that we can play a role in even decision making, and that I think that's actually a good thing. That I think it represents people wanting, more groups wanting to be, and more governments wanting to be really a part of kind of day-to-day decisions and strategy making, and I think that can be a good thing, and they want oftentimes close relationships with the governments themselves, which I think we all agree it's important to kind of build up the government capacity and make sure that they have those relationships, that at some point in the future they don't need us. And so I guess that's what I'd say about it. It does require a bit of a different script and a different way of working, but I think it's something we're probably familiar with in various contexts. It just has to be I guess, scaled up. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. Mr. Stefano Gatti, if I said that correctly as well. Let me now turn to you. So we have the honor of having the Director General for Development Cooperation with the Italian government. Mr. Gatti comes with a long career as an Italian diplomat in the diplomatic service, including as permanent representative to NATO, and as well to the UN in New York. And you are also the special envoy for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation for Food Security. So you know our problematic well as humanitarian, and you come with a development vision. And you've heard what the different speakers have said about how to lean into new sources of financing, how to be able to better articulate that impact, how to really fund local in complementary with other sources, and that there is still, and thank you for this, there is still a sense of solidarity and hope at the sort of individual government level. The people do care still. So that was a nice positive message. From the perspective, first of all, of you as a government, as the Italian government, when we talk about the funding cuts and the funding shocks, I guess the question for you is this a long-term trend? Do you find that humanitarian funding or funding will keep on going down? Or can we hope that there will be a sort of upward pivot to funding at some point? And then I'm going to ask you about IFIs and debt for development swaps and how we can get into that space. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's on. I was wondering. My name is Stefano, but don't worry, I have a British mother, so she always calls me Stefano. I don't know why. It's listen, you give me my name, at least say it correctly, but it's fine, no problem.
I apologize.
No. She could have chosen a different one, but that's it. So no, really, thank you very much. It's very interesting, to be here and hear the old perspective. And while I was hearing this perspective, I was considering that obviously all of us do, in a way, the same thing, but also we have a different job. So when there's a question of donors, I was thinking donors. There are so many different categories of donors, and obviously these donors do things in a totally different way. So obviously, our friend here from the Bill Gates Foundation, his daily problem is Bill or Melinda or whatever. It's my daily problem is one prime minister, one foreign minister, one deputy foreign minister for development affairs, and 900 parliamentarians that kill you every time you go in front of them because you've done everything wrong, and they could have done it much, much better. So, and then you have a press that obviously is looking for anything that is a scandal. No, anything that is very well done, obviously they won't write a piece because it doesn't come out on their newspaper. So each of us has a different, perspective. But one point I would like to make is this. As I see it, obviously, Director General, I'm not a politician, I am a manager, I'm a public manager, and I have to manage public money, based on, the respect of our laws and the ethics of using the money of the public, or the taxpayer, in the most effective way possible. So my first reaction is there cuts to humanitarian grant financing? Yes, wherever you go, everybody from the Secretary General of the United Nations to anybody else tells you that there's not enough money, and we have 1/10 of the money that we needed to solve all the problems of the world. Yeah, okay. I would say that what I see in my position is that money is around there. Now, money exists and obviously fluctuates. Somebody provides 40% of all the money and the day after crashes out of the road. Okay, that's another issue that you have to deal with. But generally speaking, money exists there. There are different, interlocutors. There are governments, donor governments. This is the general public that, by the way, donates a lot in different way and has to be convinced that they want to do that. There are philanthropies. I've been recently in New York in several events. Obviously, any Italian that thinks about philanthropy thinks about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation because that is more popular, but there's so much else, and with all respect, obviously, to our friends there. And I was in New York and there were meetings, and there's so much of philanthropy. So if it's true that the US government that makes choices based on democratic principles of functioning, so I have no comments to make on that, has decided to do or not to do something, an America exists that has philanthropists and a hell of a lot of money there that they need to, what I know at this moment that, we sit, I sit, and my team sits on, the funds, public funds that are given by a government this year, 2025, where G7 country, Italy is the only G7 country that has not lowered the amount of international cooperation funds. Are we heroes? No, I don't think. Surely a political choice has been made, so that has political significance. It's very important. And in a way, we are escalating, so the gradual, the classification, but we are escalating in a reverse sense, that all the others going back. It's not that we are going quicker than others, it's that the others are slowing down. So first you are 10th, and you're 5th, you're 4th, but with the same amount of money. So it's, sorry, I have to go slower. I know that. I'll try to do that. It's not easy. So I have British sides and Italian side. My speed is the Italian part. So Italy is a middle donor, I would say, in that way. We have been confirmed this year around 1 billion of financing, 958 millions of grants, and we have around 6 billion of loans, and then we also have in Italy the biggest national climate fund of 4.4 billion euros, on which I sit also on the board. So we have overall an amount of money. Plus, we contribute, when the OSCE calculates our overall ODA, it's in the range from 6 to 7 billion euros per year, because, by the way, they decide to calculate this every time in a different way. So you have things that are calculated, they're not calculated. The COVID funds are calculated, migration funds are calculated. So you always sit in a world that, shifts and changes. But the fact is that Italy has maintained and retained its commitment in a situation in which, so the question is long-term trend. I think that we live in a world in which no long-term trend exists of any kind possible, because things change on a daily basis, and nobody was in a position to forecast 1 month before what was happening. So we sit today here in the hope that the war in Gaza has finished. Is it the case? Is it not the case? We will see it, and obviously we all hope that it is the case. And by the way, if this is the case, everybody, even our government, is asking me, how much resources do we have, to go and invest in the reconstruction of Gaza. And whatever resources we have will be infinitely less of what is needed, because you're looking in the terms of hundreds of billions. And who has hundreds of billions for one emergency? Because with all the due respect of what is happening in Gaza, we all know, because that is not even the biggest humanitarian crisis that we have today in the world. So it's the most politically, everybody wants to follow for so many different reasons that it's not up to me to say now, but the others, so we have meetings on what do we do about Sudan. That is obviously, and they see that is very correctly a panel on this, that is today the biggest one. We have 2 famines declared by United Nations, and most probably a 3rd one coming. So that is the reality today. So what do you do with that? One thing, just a few information. For us in Italy, by the way, when we are given money every year by the government, our money is not already allocated between humanitarian and development. So what is the first sort of competition to the humanitarian funding is the development funding. Because, the question is, if you lower development, you, in a sense, are sort of impeding the long-term solution of problems that then become humanitarian. So what do you do? Everything that you, and then you have obviously a public opinion, press, why are you not doing that? Why are you not doubling the Gavi fund? Why not doubling, the global fund? Why not the global partnership for education? Why the money is finished? So the only certainty, a long-term trend is that mathematics is not an opinion. So what we have to make decisions. And the decisions, I hear all these things, we will like, as some organizations, donors, have to make a commitment and invest on the future of that organization. Yes, this is very well. No, in the sense that obviously I have a government and a parliament that asks me what I have done for that crisis specifically, Plus, let me say one important thing. So for us, the issue is, yes, there's a money crisis, financing crisis in all possible levels, or not only on the humanitarian level. Just to give you an example, I will just, my collaborators asking the data. We get this year we've got 958 million euros of grants. So then we will go to the loans, because we are using grants, but we are not using loans. So why are we not using loans? But in grants, 900, and our resources for humanitarian in our program this year is 225. So why? You have much more money. Yeah, because we have launched a number of initiatives for development in a number of countries. As you know, Italy has a priority for Africa. That we have launched and developed the Humanitarian Plan for Africa, where we are heavily investing and working in a number of countries. We are doing a number of innovative things. We have launched for the first time projects co-financed by the private sector. This was an tema before, obviously. In Italy, we are, try to do innovative things in partnership, and once you launch these things, you cannot stop. To invest them, you launch them, and then you have the second year, third year, no project exists that lasts 1 year, zero, absolutely zero. And then the more you go forward, even if you have the same amount of money, year after year, it will be reduced, because if you have launched positive things that work on the ground that countries want you to continue to do, and your government wants you to continue to commit on that thing, in effect, you're having less and less available money for other things. So that's it, just to be transparent and open. 958, 225. Could we have decided to do double? Yes, we would have cut the hell of a number of development projects that we are doing. Secondly, the question is humanitarian what? Because when I look at a lot of projects and programs that we finance, in fact, they are humanitarians. So the definition of there's all this thing of the nexus. Nexus is one of the top words, between development and humanitarian. If I finance I see that you have our friend in Pagliazzo later, on the Comunità di Sant'Egidio. If we finance, because we have started for the first time last year to finance the dream centers for HIV and tuberculosis of Sant'Egidio community in 12 African countries, these centers save life of people. So it's not a humanitarian brackets, but save life of people daily. It's not that they save it in 10 years' time. No, daily they save it, and some of these exist. So when I went in Guinea-Conakry, that is a priority country of Italy, the government said, listen, one thing, we have 4 centers of dream centers. I need double. You need double. And please put them in a forestal Guinea, by the way, as you know, is the place where Ebola comes from, because we have no laboratory whatsoever, one laboratory. Everybody gets something in Guinea. Conakry has to travel 800 kilometers to have any kind of medical test possible. And so we are building one there. What is it? Is it development? Is it humanitarian? It's life-saving intervention. So even the question of the definition is very important. Finally, our point, for me at least, in a position which I am, the question is, every day, is not how much money I have, because I have what the government gives me. It's not that I can do very much. And frankly speaking, if I were to go to the government, to parliament, say I need double of that money, today I will not be doing that. Because until I am sure that we are using the money effectively, I will not be doing, even if I do it, it's not the fact that I do it that will make the decision. It's a political decision, it's a government decision, a parliamentary decision. It's not our role. But today, even if somebody rises up, our Prime Minister, and say, next year you have double, I will have a problem. Because I need to be sure that I sit on a system that uses this money well. And that, I may have to say, is not exactly the case. Some things work very well, a few others, and our colleagues from the Italian civil society organization know it, absolutely not. And for me, one of the things, and the key words is collaboration and not competition. When money is scarce, all the different actors have to get together. Instead, we have a system, or a system has been built in Italy, where the government has put in competition all the different NGOs that have to come and participate to public call, to tenders. By the way, tender for me, I'm a public officer, I respect the law, but a tender is not for development cooperation. A tender is not for humanitarian. A tender is to build a bridge on you want to do an underground, do a tender. But, for lack of any other possible ways of doing effectively things, our system, even if our law does not say, and our colleagues know, our law does not say that you have to use this money with tenders. It says, our law, that you have to use comparative ways. So you have to look of who you have in front and who has the capacity. This is true, but is the tender the right way of doing it? Possibly with a maximum limit of 2 million euros, because so everybody can participate, is no. My answer is no. This thing does not work in any possible way. And we have to find a new way. And I'm saying to our friends of the civil organization, because every time you say, let's do things in a new way, why do you want to do things in another way? Because whatever way you've done it, there's a world that has grown comfortable. I know that thing is coming, I will get that, and now do we change things, and will I be out of this system, will I be in? For me, the point is collaboration over competition and co-planning and co-project. So we have to do the project together. We have to build the project together. I have to be in a position by my agency, the different parts of the public administration sit with international organizations and NGOs. Instead, I have a system where our NGOs have to compete for emergency money. So I look to our colleagues, especially to the person that is in charge of the only big organization that does only humanitarian work, and they have to compete, and they have to, once they get through this competition, they have to give us a bank guarantee. So an organization has to pay the government before even being in a position to start work. This thing for me, it doesn't work in any possible way. So we have to reform the system. We have to simplify, we have to change it. So for me, the word of the day confronted with this tsunami that we are in front is we have to innovate, we have to change, we have to find very much more effective way and procedures. So every time I say this, people say, I have two magistrates in my Director General. They say, why? You have to have rules. Yes, you have to have rules. You do not have to have idiotic rules. You have to have rules at work that make sense, that are clear to us, but allow us to be effective. So surely you do not have to ask NGOs to pay you money in order to start working. That makes no sense whatsoever. And finally, we are now shifting. So we are looking at our architecture, changing it, even if this it creates nightmares for some of our colleagues of the civil society organizations, but I like to appear in the nightmares and say we need to be all efficient, and really use public money in the best way. So no competition. Yes, we have to do rosters. Yes, we have to rosters with clear rules where you get into the roster, but then, you are able, able to ask you to, and in 1 week, 10 days, you present to me there and you go. Not months, because we have some competition for emergency things that after 6 months, we are still, did you receive money? No. So, okay, that is not humanitarian anyway. So collaboration, competition, localization. We have to work locally. And this we totally agree with our friends. They have written a report. We totally agree with local realities. That is very important. We have to engage the private sector. How do we do that? Has anybody had good ideas and good ways of, because some things are said, and mantras that are said, but I would like to see a best practice of how do we work with the private sector in an effective way. And finally, I would like to say financing. So my question continues to be the same. For the resources that we have, grants finish like that. The money gives you, the government gives you a grant, and it's gone. And instead, money that we have a revolving fund of 6 billion euros, and they still have 700 million there. So it's used well, but they have 700 million. Not one civil society organization, not even one international organization has come to me to propose ideas of how can we use the grants money. And by the way, our grants are highly concessional. It's not a bank loan. It's really, really highly concessional. But obviously it needs a totally new way of looking at things and at doing things. So the way in which new financing solutions, new ways of co-financing, these are really things that we had to do even before. Today, more than ever. I would just want to say then one final thing. In this world that changes, I hear a lot of things where you have bad guys, good guys. It's not my sort of role to define who is bad, is good. My role is to work well and use our money. But I would like just to make a few points. It's not that international cooperation funding started to decrease when a certain person was nominated president of US. With all respect to our Dutch friend, the Dutch government, well before somebody was nominated, halved his international cooperation. So if somebody thinks that the disease is there, I don't think a disease is there, it didn't start in one country. Let's look at where exactly they start. And one thing I would like to say is that if this one government has connected the decrease of international cooperation funding to the increase of defense funding, it's not the US government. So one country, that is not my country, luckily enough, said, oh, you know what, because I have to increase now, you have to increase defense funding is one thing. If possibly war has come back to Europe and there's a country that, invades others in Europe, can make totally sense that somebody thinks that I have to sort of prepare myself to whatever comes. But who said that that is connected to, so if I increase one, I decrease that, surely not on the other side of the ocean. So we have to look at our side of the ocean. So it's just to establish, sometimes a little bit of truth is useful, and then we try to do our job as best as possible. Thank you.
Sugati, thank you so much. I'm looking for our organizers because I know we started a bit late. How much more time do we have? 15 minutes? Perfect. Can I open up the floor then to questions? Maybe I take 2 or 3 questions, and then I'll turn it back to the panelists. Yes, there's a question in the back there.
Okay, thank you so much. Dieu merci, Lundo. I'm from the Democratic Republic of Congo, but I live in Kenya. I'm a refugee in Kakuma refugee camp. I was following these events online, then I get just motivation to come and also attend it physically. So I've really appreciated all points that I get in these events. And my question was, because I'm founder of a community-based organization in Kakuma refugee camp called Vijana Twaweza Club. My question was, we understand challenges that NGOs are facing in funding and all those issues. My question was, do you have a plan or an idea or plan to work also with or to partner with a community-based organization in order to solve those issues that I don't know if I think some of your fund cannot support the refugees and also those countries in conflict and many others. But my question was, do you also have a plan or idea to support or to work in close contact with CBOs or community-based organizations to solve some issues that they are facing in the community? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Are there other questions? So otherwise, I will ask questions on my side as well. Yeah? Okay, perfect. So let me ask, maybe the working with the CBOs, it's the sort of scaling of the ultra-local. If I can ask, well, all the panelists, but especially I think Benoit on that one. And then Mr. Gatti, I would ask you then to look at the debt for development swaps. Because we're hearing about those in the environment space. We're actually hearing, I think it was in the Caribbean, that there was a debt for development swap, a new generation of them, which is not a forgiveness of debt, but actually bringing in IFI players to make the debt more attractive, if I understand correctly. but I am not an expert, so I may have completely mixed it all up. But apparently, whatever it was, it funded an endowment fund, which then funded NGOs working in the conservation space. And through an endowment fund, which kept going. So is that a new type of silver bullet? And can we use that within the humanitarian space? Which goes to our colleague's question as well, is can we look to these type of debt swaps that could then trickle down funding to the ultra-local eventually? Over to you, Benoit. And then, of course, Andrew and Jerome as well. Please jump in on anything that you've heard from the different panelists as well. I'm going to turn to you after.
I'll stay short, but so I'll stay short. Merci pour ta question, pour la question sur le travail avec le CBO. What? Closer?
English.
English. Okay, sorry. I wanted to be kind. Sorry. I wanted to be kind. See. No, we're working with CBOs for development organizations working with CBOs. It's bread and butter. It's obvious. What we're seeing now is that for the humanitarian sector, in a way, they're catching up and saying, yeah, how would that work? And we've been trying to, I already explained the ERRs enough, I think, but we're also having a program in Lebanon, Turkey, and Iraq, for example, where we work with CBOs, even non-registered CBOs, and that's a program funded by the Dutch government. And it's quite interesting because we see with the Dutch government that they're also trying to see how can we empower localization, how can we truly shift the power, how can we have sustainable impact, and these approaches are being tested right now. And if you actually do that, you see that it's quite cost effective as well. The impact is higher. So definitely, I think within the humanitarian sector, that is something that we will see, or no, that we should see more. But I think there's a lot of resistance because it requires us to rethink our role as INGO, and I think that's really the challenge for the next years. How do you reshape your own model? And if we look a bit at how our model has grown over the years, I started, for example, the work with MSF in the tsunami. So you had the tsunami, you had the earthquake in Pakistan, I don't know all of them, but then you have Haiti, cholera, and you had COVID. And each time it was more and more and more given to the Global Nordic Fund, but definitely not to the local organizations. And the question is, have we used that money responsibly? And I think we've created systems around this idea of compliance, quality control, standards, whatnot, and with good reasons, right? I mean, not doing harm is a bit of a core concept, but I think what we have built in the Global North is so big and overly heavy that now recalibrating a little bit, now that there's less money, what is our model and what is our role? And how do we relate to, coming back to your point, how do we relate to the CBOs that actually know what is required? And I think that's now the challenge for us. The money is not going to come back. That even if we're creative with getting a bit more from our private donors, if I have my conversations with other foundations, it's never going to be enough. Let's not pretend that ever we could solve all humanitarian needs. That's an argument that doesn't make sense. We cannot cover all the needs. We've never been able to do that. It's not the role of humanitarian organizations to cover all needs. It's to try to help the most vulnerable as best we can. And then, as I said earlier, then advocate and push for governments to do their role. And I think, for example, I'll hand over to you on debt, for example. I mean, if we talk about Haiti, for example, right? I mean, they were the first to liberate themselves from colonial power, and they're still struggling because France is putting debts on them. I mean, that's where I think we should be on the ground, doing the témoignage of what is happening, try to do as good as we can with the money that we have, and then push others to correct what's wrong.
Benoit, thank you. Mr. Gatti, I know it's a very, very big topic, this debt for swaps. I know the WFP has done 13 of them, I think, to date. I think other UN agencies are looking at them as well. I don't know what you can do justice in 2 or 3 minutes, but just give us very quickly, I mean, your impression. Is this something we should be exploring as and as you said, humanitarian development, it's all a question of language, it's very much often the same things. Is this something that we should be exploring as humanitarians? I've spoken about this to a number of governments who seem interested. Let us know, do you think this is something we can, there's a hope for the future in this?
Yeah, my answer is definitely yes. I don't know if the WFP is doing debt swap because they are supporting technically, more probably, and structuring, but obviously they do not have credits with the country because they are not giving, loans. That is not free national countries, so it's sovereign debt. All this has been intensely discussed even last year during our presidency at G7 level. So it's a very incredibly complex issue, very sensitive question. If you start to give the message that whoever you give a loan cannot give it back, the whole financial international system collapses. So the question is how do you structure that and what does it mean? But we need, yes, we believe that debt swaps are something, and Italy has now announced, our Prime Minister has announced at the Sevilla Conference for Financing, a 10-year debt swap program launched by the government of Italy of the value of several hundred million euros in 15 African countries that we will start to implement. And we are now starting to examine also with the Prime Minister office, what do we do? Now, the first thing is that if you swap debt, the government that has the debt has to agree. So it's not something that you can decide unilaterally. You have to sit down and they have to agree. What does it mean? And where do you use this money? Because at the end of the day, it's money that you're given to them and you accept that they don't give it back to you if they do use it in doing something. But because this is happening, it's happening more and more. And there's a clear realization from big donor countries that, this huge burden of debt, we cannot just sit down there and expect that everything will be given back. And something has to be done because it's an enormous burden to the development. What do we do? Now, there is once again a lot of competition for resources, but as I have been said to UN organizations, I didn't confront the issue of NGOs and UN organizational entities, but I think that this is a moment to say that if I pay an overhead to a United Nations agency, that United Nations agency, is it 7, is it 10, is it 12, that is, there should be one UN system, but there are 77 different overheads. So this is demonstration that one UN does not exist. But apart from that, this money is not used by this organization to cover the administrative and personnel cost for that project. It's taken by the organization as a tax for the existing and working and functioning. If I, after a very horribly complex competition, gave some money to Intersource that has produced the same amount of paper you need to produce for, building the bridge on the Messina Strait, and has got an award of 2 million euros, the overhead that I recognize to them is the money to work on the project, not the money to go around to the Luna Park or do anything else. So that is the real difference, and that is the real problem with the United Nations agency system, to which I'm telling consistently that the Italian government, the voluntary funding, please give me 50 million each year because you have done that in the last years, is no. No, because this, in this new world, really makes no sense whatsoever. And I have even to consider if I want to finance you for a specific project, if you levy this VAT, on project, that UN system level. So for me, the answer is NGOs. And then we have to work with them. But what I'm saying to this world, to the NGO world, there's a whole debt world, credit world, that amounts to much more than the grant, because there's a multiple of that can be leveraged. We have to find the ways together, innovative instruments together with the governments, but we have to do that because we can do it. And I continue to, will somebody come to me and tell me the 700 million of revolving fund are very, very highly concessional loans. We use for some projects interest of 0 and first repayment of 15 years. So financially speaking, that is 1/3 is a grant of that, if you do that. So will the humanitarian system come, look, develop the expertise and come to make proposal to use those resources? That is something that we need to do. In terms of financial institutions, it's very important. We are opening now. We have to find innovative ways of Debt swap is one way, but that does not involve so much the international financial organization. It's more a relationship with the country and deciding with whom and what do we do with that money. But then there's the question of the international organizations. We are opening up funds with the World Bank, with the African Development Bank mostly. These are funds both in grants and in loans, and they're matching funds. So these banks are telling you, if you put the fund, I will put €1 for every euro that you put. That obviously is an important multiplication of resources. We are doing that in a big way, so we have several hundred millions allocated in different ways, and once again, open to a civil society organization to approach them and say, what can we propose? What can we do? How do we want to do it? And we are absolutely open to start this new path that we really have to work together.
We will be coming back to you on this, I can assure you. Thank you very much. Jerome, Andrew, any last thoughts, last words?
Well, very quickly. First of all, I'm sorry for the translator. Someone actually spoke faster than me. So, I think on the discussion, the issue of accountability is really important because accountability is a shared responsibility chain and not an upward compliance ladder just towards parliaments, just toward boards. It's about trust. It's about some of the things that you said. You need to create that dialogue and be able to make sure that it comes with transparency, it comes with outcome for people, and doesn't translate in what it is actually, which is an unsurmountable chain of paperwork. Now that goes into the simplicity, and we need to find ways to simplify. Therefore, the reset isn't good. It's not about rebooting, resetting. It's about totally rethinking in today's kind of world what we need, what's going to be, how to get out of those silos that we're completely stuck in, kind of living in a world of our own, and being agnostic to sector as long as it works. So going towards, BRAC has tried to build this kind of solutions ecosystem. We're still learning, we're still seeing, which, links academic work with on-the-ground work, with private enterprises, with NGO work. And I think there's a lot to learn from these kind of ways of doing it differently. And so in some ways, the real risk is the status quo of a reset and not a complete rethink to bring out the invisibility of what always gives me hope, of the huge level of imagination, resilience, that really comes at the ground level, and connecting that ground level imagination with the best of science out there, because that's what's actually brought the huge step forwards that we have. And quite often it's giving the trust that this person may not know how to use it today, but they'll probably know how to use it a lot better than I do today, because it's more fit for purpose for them to make that seismic change in what they're seeing on the ground. So it goes down to that trust level of bypassing all those layers that today really suffocate the system and really the delivery at ground level.
Jerome, thank you so much for that. Andrew, you have the honor, the last word.
Wow. Well, no, thanks so much. And I've learned a lot through this. I will say, I'm left with this question of how you somehow smash this hyper local level to the global level together, because that's connecting those is where their change, I think, really, really happens. And I come back to this point I was making in the beginning, like, is there an existing or a new alliance that could be created? Geneva, Rome, as kind of a one-stop model for raising humanitarian funding and engaging donors and highlighting issues, showing models that work, showing political dialogue that works. The story of James Grant came to mind in all of this. I don't know if you know, back in the 80s with the Days of Tranquility, where there was fighting in El Salvador and Lebanon and Sudan and other places, and he took some courageous actions to push for a ceasefire to allow vaccination and other medical activities to happen. These are the kind of courageous things that can happen when humanitarian work can cut through the politics and the conflict and save lives in the end. So anyway, this is inspiring. I hope you all were equally inspired as I was in this conversation, and hopefully some good action can come out of this and the rest of the discussions this week. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you for that, and very good last word about the courage and very hopeful for me. I think that you're going to be very busy with humanitarians knocking on your door, and we're going to be coming quickly. Thank you to all of my panelists. It was a really interesting conversation. Hope you enjoyed it as well, and I hand over the floor.
Thank you to the panelists. So we have a 10 minutes break, but be back on time, please.
Thank you.
Che fai un sondaggio, c'è Benoit, Christopher Cosua, chiedi a lui che fate un sondaggio, adesso c'è altro da fare, no?
Signal that we can start. I think 1 minute more for people to join. Good afternoon, everyone. We are at the last panel of today. Very, very hard work to close this day. All the very interesting conversations that we had today, very fascinating inputs and comments, but I assure you this session will be as much as interesting, albeit a little bit shorter, so we are trying to cover a lot in 1 hour. And bear with us, it will be interesting. So again, welcome. This is the last session of 2025 Rome Humanitarian Congress. And this session is a thematic one that we decided to dedicate to one of the most devastating humanitarian crises that we have ongoing globally, which is the crisis of Sudan. And indeed, Stefano Gatti, the director in the previous session, has mentioned, has evoked Sudan as a neglected one. And despite being the most, among the most humanitarian devastating crisis, doesn't hit much the headlines. This session is organized in collaboration with the Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna School, and the researchers of Scuola Sant'Anna will help us continuing some of the conversations that we had today in the 2 panels. For example, we will try to understand how the decrease of humanitarian funding is concretely affecting the work of humanitarian organizations in the field, taking the case study of Intersos. And then we'll try to understand how and if artificial intelligence is contributing in reducing child recruitment, in preventing child recruitment there where the normal protection systems are failing, which is the case of a conflict. Before we start, though, I would like to introduce the panelists. And I will start with Paolo Impagliazzo. Doesn't need much of a presentation. Paolo is the Secretary General of Comunità Sant'Egidio community. He is working for Sant'Egidio since early 2000, if I'm not wrong. And he helped contributing to some reconciliation and peace processes along the way, like Darfur, Liberia, South Sudan, and even Sudan at a point. And then we have Arianna Ragucci, here on my left, who will present us the paper called Humanitarianism in Resource-Constrained Environments, Inter-source Adaptation Strategies in Sudan. Arianna has worked with us in HQ and also in Chad, so she knows inter-source very well. And last but not least, online, we have Safa Yagoub, who will present us the research Preventing Child Recruitment in Conflict Zones, the potential and pitfalls of ethical artificial intelligence in humanitarian practice. So welcome to all the panelists, and thank you very much for joining us in this important day for the Inter-source as well. So before giving the floor to the panelists, just 2 minutes, because we don't have much of a time, for framing a little bit the conversation around this crisis. My name is Alda Capelletti, and I work for Inter-source, and we have chosen indeed to call this session Away from Spotlight, Research and Practice Perspectives on Sudan Crisis. Well, Sudan crisis started already more than 2 years ago, a civil war that started in April 2023, and there is no signs of finding a resolution to this crisis. And the numbers themselves are really staggering. We have 14 million people who are displaced because of the conflict, and out of these 4 million people have tried to seek refuge in neighboring countries that are themselves really fragile and resource scarce. So we have Chad hosting refugees, we have South Sudan, we have Ethiopia, and even Central African Republic. At least 150,000 people were killed due to this conflict, though the numbers are most likely much higher than these. But in this conflict, it's very, very difficult to have reliable information. So we are expecting that the final numbers would be much higher, unfortunately. And half of the population today, that means 25 million people, suffer acute hunger. That also means that there are pockets in the countries where famine has been declared. And one of the areas is in Darfur, North Darfur, El Fashir, which is the city that is under siege since a couple of years now, which is at the center of one of the research that Safa will illustrate to us after. It is not only a matter of displacement, it's a matter of this crisis has brought a complete disruption of the infrastructure of the state. That means schools are closed, 19 million children are not able to go to school. That means the future of an entire generation is in ruin. We have the health system completely disrupted, hospitals are in ruin, targets destroyed, health centers as well. And currently, actually, we have one of the most severe cholera epidemics going on in most of the countries, including Darfur, the East, etc. And malaria is endemic. So all of these to show that Sudan is a crisis that is close to us, despite not being in the highlights of the newspaper too much, is a little bit neglected. And it is a crisis that speaks to us and even tests our collective responsibilities, is testing the effectiveness of the international response, and ultimately is testing the future of humanitarian action, which is exactly the topic that we are trying to unpack in the theme of this Congress. So without further ado, I will start with you, Paolo, and I will ask you if you can please help us understanding a little bit better the origin and the complexity of this crisis, why it's so neglected, why nobody's talking about Sudan, and as well what the Comunità Sant'Egidio is doing to contribute to the peace process, if any peace process is ongoing, and if we can talk about a peace process. To you.
Thank you very much, Alda, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here and to be invited to this Humanitarian Congress organized by Intersos. And it's also a pleasure to be here with this, to discuss also what the two researchers did and will present today. So let me first of all try to answer the question of Alda, and also to starting saying that unfortunately, let me say it's a perfect storm on Sudan. The roots of this perfect storm are dates some years back, but unfortunately the storm is developing right now. A bit of history, if I may. Sudan is quite a large country with a complex history and a very troubled recent past, starting with the independence of South Sudan, which gave rise to the youngest country in the world. South Sudan independence was not painless because the war that brought to South Sudan independence started 1955. It means that Sudan was at war for a long period of its history. And the independence was in 2011 and the peace agreement 2005. So with South Sudan, Khartoum lost a large part of its oil resources and therefore lost a certain amount of wealth. Until the 2019 revolution, Sudan was ruled for almost 30 years by a military dictatorship that was quite brutal, particularly towards South Sudan, but also towards Darfur. We all remember the Janjaweed, or maybe we have in our ears the name Janjaweed. Janjaweed, this militia loyal to Bashir in an attempt to limit the autonomy of the non-Arab tribes in Darfur. In general, South Sudan has long suffered from a dichotomy between the central part of the country, the tribes along the river Nile, and the peripheries, like the south, but also Kordofan, Darfur, and also the eastern part of the country. We were discussing with Alda how neglected is today Port Sudan in the eastern part of the country. This dichotomy has its roots in the Anglo-Egyptian colonial period. The deposition of President Bashir in April 2019, brought about by mass demonstration and then supported by the army, opened a new chapter in the history of this country, a chapter undermined as its roots by the presence of two armies, the Sudanese Armed Force and the Rapid Support Forces led by the General Hemeti, Bashir's right-hand man on the Darfur issue. One country, two armies. We could call it a recipe for failure, something that had already happened in South Sudan with the armies of Salva Kiir, the president, and Riek Machar, the first vice president, which clashed twice in the early years of independence, and plunged the country into chaos that continues till today, more or less. One country, two armies. It was led to the civil war that has been ravaging the country for more than almost 3 years, with dire consequences. Aldo already mentioned the extremely difficult situation of the civilians facing famine and many other problems with this huge number or enormous number of refugees and internal displaced people. But I was speaking about the perfect storm, because this war started in a moment when the international community was a bit distracted by other major crises: the war in Ukraine, the Gaza crisis, and the decision by the new US administration to close USAID. So this is the perfect storm. Other major crises in the Western world, let me say, the closure of a very important humanitarian aid program that was covering 71% of the humanitarian aid in Sudan, so it was the major part of it, and also the fact that the two parties are not willing to discuss or to even establish a channel of communication. Till today, it is very difficult. They first met, the SAF and RSF, in Jeddah under the American or the US administration, the previous one, the Biden administration, tried to, find a way to solve the problem, their problem. But after that, after this first attempt, situation is deteriorating day by day, and there is no will on both sides to establish or to find a way to solve the conflict. This is something that is quite disappointing, because it seems to us that Sudanese people or protagonists are not really very interested in what is going on or what is happening to their own people. And they are also waiting for external actors to decide if the war must continue or not. This is the feeling that we have, because they are not engaging themselves and they are relying on external supporters. On both sides, they are relying on external supporters for a solution. What we have done as a community of Sant'Egidio, not too much. Our contribution on the humanitarian side is to support the Sudanese refugees both in Chad and in South Sudan. What we did was something quite important. We established a direct contact between the two parties to evacuate people from Khartoum. There was a house of some sisters hosting people of the neighborhood in the house, because there is a well in the house to provide water to everybody. So we facilitate the evacuation of the nuns and the people in this house, putting RSF and SAF in communication, because the house was on the front line at that time in Khartoum. And we were, it was a success story, because the nuns were evacuated despite the first attempt failed, but the second one worked. Together with the International Committee of the Red Cross. You mentioned the spotlight. Away from the spotlight, Sant'Egidio, together with the Comboni missionaries, with Emergency and with Médecins Sans Frontières, already tried twice to draw attention to the Sudanese crisis, asking to the Italian government for something, to take concrete steps to avoid continuing to finance the border police in Sudan, that is in the end of RSF. There was a European Union program financing, let me say, RSF to control the border and to avoid, of course, illegal migration, etc. The second point we raised with the Italian government was to not to give weapons to the parties in conflict in accordance with an Italian law 185, but also avoiding dangerous triangulation, because we have good relation with other countries, particularly with the United Arab Emirates, that are also connected with this crisis, and to put pressure on the parties to guarantee access to humanitarian convoys. On the political side, we had some meeting and some mission. We were also able at a certain point to put in contact RSF and Masalit people that are, I mean, the most affected people in West Darfur. The capital, Janina, was totally overrun by RSF, and Masalit people were forced to Chad. And so we were trying to do something, and we are continuing to facilitate some informal dialogue. And we hope that Sudanese will take their future in their hands, particularly the leadership of the two parties at war, to try to put an end to this crisis. And that's all.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paolo, for this introduction to the crisis. And indeed, there are one point in particular which I captured from your introduction, from your intervention. So the perception that Sudanese people themselves are waiting for an external intervention. And well, there are many external interventions, if you want, in one way in the crisis. We have this. Sudan is like a playground for different states. We have Emirates from one side, we have Egypt, we have Turkey, we have also Ukraine and Russia fighting each other inside Sudan. So indeed, there are many, many actors which are externally influencing the fate of this conflict without working for a positive and a peace resolution. And even connected to something that Christopher Stock mentioned this morning when he recalled some interventions by the US government, some initiative, humanitarian diplomacy that led to good humanitarian outcome. Well, in this crisis, in this case, it seems US is unwilling, unable, or simply uninterested to invest a little bit more to support this peace process. How you see this complex scenario of all these actors involved, but no peace in sight?
Yep. Yeah, you are right. There are so many actors playing their role in Sudan as a playground, as you said. The new US administration, recently there was a meeting in Washington, the Quad meeting, and what we got from this meeting is that US administration is trying to avoid any kind of Islamist influence in the Port Sudan on the Port Sudan side, on the south. This is their concern. This is the concern to cut any links with Iran and other partners, and also to get rid of many of the Islamists that are still part they're still playing their role. The Bashir party is not finished. I mean, although he was in jail for a couple of years, but others are playing an important role. And in fact, in this last meeting in the US, an Islamist militia and the leader of Justice and Equality Movement were sanctioned by the US administration, labeled as Islamist. So let's see if there will be a future of engagement of the government, of the new US administration with the other parties, because there were not only the US, but also Saudi Arabia, the Emirates and Egypt in this meeting. And let's see what will happen. I believe that if I can say something about the Sudanese, they lost some opportunities, both sides, to stop the hostilities, and the country is so fragmented with different militia, with different, so fragmented, and as you said, to reconnect everything, it will take some time.
Thank you, Paolo, for that. And now, continuing talking about U.S. administration and this stop work order that jumped on the humanitarian community last January or February, I will give the floor to Arianna, because the research that she has done is exactly analyzing and trying to understand what concretely are the impacts related to the reduced funding in one crisis like Sudan for a humanitarian organization. And she took Intersos as a case study. So please, Arianna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alda. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Intersos, for giving me this opportunity, and thank you, Sant'Anna School, for allowing me to present my research here. My name is Arianna, as Alda already mentioned, and I will share with you my findings. My research is called Humanitarianism in Resource-Constrained Environments, an analysis of Intersos adaptations strategies in Sudan. So today we've talked a lot extensively about humanitarianism and the challenges of it in light of funding cuts, but also in light of IHL violations, which continue almost blatantly in Sudan. My research intended to deepen this conversation by focusing specifically on Intersos and its approach in the country. Here you can see a table of contents, so we'll first introduce the research question, then go on to the analytical framework and the methodology employed to conduct this research. Then I will give a brief overview of the context in Sudan, but Paolo already did an amazing job, so I will go quickly on that. I will then highlight the humanitarian access challenges in the country, the funding crisis, and what have been the consequences operationally on the ground of this funding crisis. Finally, I will go on to the strategies that Intersos is trying to adopt right now, and I will conclude with some recommendations for the broader community. So the research question that guided this research was: how does resource scarcity affect Intersos' operational choices and adherence to humanitarian principles in Sudan? Why did I choose Sudan? First of all, because of the ongoing conflict between the SAF and the RSF, which has split the country in two, basically, and has generated severe access constraints and massive displacement of the civilian population. Second, because Sudan is an emblematic example of chronic underfunding even before the US stop-to-work order. And third, also because it represents a relatively new context for Intersos, being that the organization had been working in Sudan, but had closed the mission and only reopened last year after a decade of inactivity. And so it is now confronted with a relatively new context, but with, in a situation of resource deprivations and very volatile. At the same time, this being said, the crisis is also engulfed in the global crisis of funding, with 16 out of the 20 major donors having reduced their humanitarian spending. And of course, as it was said already, the US, that was previously accounting for around 40% of global humanitarian aid, having cut now 90% of its programs. So to analyze this, I use the classical humanitarian principles: humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. I will not go over in detail about these. You can see them here on the screen. Basically, what I was trying to do with my research is to highlight how these principles are tested every day in Sudan, and asking myself, how does Intersos adhere to these principles under resource scarcity? In terms of methodology, I conducted literature review, but also 5 semi-structured interviews with the Intersos staff, both at the HQ in Sudan and also in Chad at the border with Sudan. I also included the fact that myself, I was a former colleague of Intersos. As Alda mentioned, I worked in the HQ, but also in Chad, so I've been at the border with Sudan. And I also acknowledge this as maybe a research limitation because of my own positionality and my internal bias, having been a former colleague. Now, very briefly, Sudan, you can see a map here of the country. There is split control versus the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces. This is translated into a dual regulatory system with, on the one hand, we have HAC, so that is the Humanitarian Aid Commission, and that is the humanitarian, let's say that the body entitled to administer aid on behalf of SAF, and that is the government of Port Sudan. On the other side, we have SARO, which is HAC counterpart, and that is the body entitled to administer aid in RSF-controlled areas, mostly in Darfur. As Paolo already explained, there have been some attempts at mediation, but these have failed. There is a strong national presence. The panels before have already mentioned the existence of the emergency response rooms, which is a local network of humanitarian aid that has been incredibly present and fundamental since the beginning of the crisis in April 2023. We see massive displacement. I'm not going to repeat the numbers as Alda already mentioned them, but I just want to highlight that 24.6 million people are now in food insecurity, and there is a total of 30 million in need of assistance. It is then one of the worst famine crises ever recorded. And just to give you one more data, Sudan humanitarian needs response plan, only the 25.8%, so around 26% of it is currently being covered, and we are 9 months into 2025. In terms of access challenges, here you can see OCHA always provides an update of the security situation in the country. So you can see that the hardest to reach areas are North Darfur and some areas of the Kordofan states. Sudan represents also one of the most dangerous environments for humanitarian workers, with 2024 having been the deadliest year of all, and that is globally. But in Sudan, the figures amount to 110 workers having killed since the start of the conflict, so since April 2023, and 35 only in the first 6 months of 2025. So this also shows you the scale of the blatant IHL violations happening in the country. There is also a persistent disruption of aid, which on the one hand, of course, it leads to famine and starvation of the civilian population, but on the other hand, it also really endangers the humanitarian personnel active on the ground. Moreover, and quite obviously, both in-country and cross-border movements are severely impaired, and that is due to the need to collaborate with various actors in Sudan. And of course, that is like that in every crisis, but in Sudan, this is made even more complicated by these dual regulatory systems of SAF and the RSF. Now, this graph here shows you the growing dependence on the US of the humanitarian sector over the last decade. Again, only for Sudan, the 71% of the humanitarian needs and response plan in 2024 was being funded by USAID. So to give you a perspective how important USAID was for Sudan. And of course, we need to also mention the fact that the EU funding has fell by 13% in 2024, with many EU states having already announced that they will continue decreasing their humanitarian spending. What have been the actual consequences on the ground? Here I listed just a few. We have reprioritization of donors' priorities, with preferring to sustain or to fund projects based on focusing on health and nutrition, to the detriment of projects based on protection, on education, on psychological activities, etc., etc. The resource scarcity has also led to a rise in competition among NGOs, which have to, of course, apply for the same calls, but and there is the same number of NGOs, but with limited funding. So this has increased competition among NGOs, unfortunately. And of course, this has translated into having smaller teams, but with heavier workloads, leading to burnouts for staff on the ground. And in Sudan, it is even more so because of the access challenges in the country, make it so that often the staff on the ground cannot respect the R&R, which is the rest and recuperation cycle that each humanitarian worker is allowed to do, to take some time off to recharge, to then go on to then continue operating in the country. In Sudan, this is even more difficult because of the access challenges. So every time you go outside of Sudan and then have to re-enter, this can take a long time. And so the consequence is that staff on the ground cannot follow the right cycle of R&R. Now, in terms of adherence to the humanitarian principles, these, of course, in this environment are very strained. The interviews have highlighted that impartiality is perhaps the most endangered principle of all, faced with the lack of financial resources to sustain structures and staff. Organizations must choose more narrowly where to place their presence, and this translates into having to choose which populations to prioritize to the detriment of others. Neutrality is then also impacted and compromised by the incapability of organizations to be present in both sides of the country. And hence, from both the SAF and the RSF perspectives, having to choose a government over the other. So this places organizations in a very difficult position, because it should never be upon organizations, humanitarian organizations, to decide which government is legitimate or not. But this, of course, talks about neutrality are very impaired by the fact that SARO, so the RSF-controlled body, demands a registration for all organizations that want to be active and want to work in under RSF-controlled areas. And this makes it so that for SAF, so the government of Port Sudan in the east, if they see that an organization registered with SAR, and so with the RSF, it is in this way legitimizing a non-state armed group. And so again, the question of neutrality is called into question. Equally, and for Intersos in this case, the organization still manages to keep presence on both sides, of course, that is despite resource scarcity. And in Intersos, if I'm not mistaken, there are more projects in Darfur, but that is because of the most acute needs in the region. Equally significant are the risks to independence. And of course, now independence in theory should be the ability of organizations to be free from external pressure. But in practice, that is almost impossible to achieve. And that is because, first of all, there is dependence on local authorities to issue visas, to grant permissions, to allow movements on certain routes. And second of all, because of the dependence on external funds. And so this has resulted in Intersos, for example, having to partially adapt their projects, focusing on health and nutrition, food distribution activities as entry points to then later focus on standalone protection work. Finally, I would say that humanity also risks being impacted, as humanitarian action risks being reduced to mere survival of the population, to the detriment of long-term protection of psychological activities, education programs, like I mentioned before. Although, of course, life-saving interventions are necessary, of course. Okay, reaching the end, the strategies in place that Intersos has adopted are quite a few. I also wanted to mention that the fact that Intersos reopened last year also has meant that the organization was not directly being funded by USAID. So, but nevertheless, the consequences have been felt, and that is because many other organizations active in Sudan were indeed receiving USAID funds, and this has translated into many organizations having to close schools, having to close hospitals, translating again into fewer cooperation opportunities for Intersos. And so what are these adaptation strategies? First of all, like it was mentioned before, donor portfolio diversification, but also integration of more donors for the same project to ensure continuity and also to minimize potential interruptions. Another idea that I thought was very interesting that was proposed by one of the interviewees, that was proposed by one of the interviewees was that of anticipating emergency hotspots. So the idea of positioning the mission in hard-to-reach areas through smaller donors, with the idea to then be prepared and be ready to be there when there will be other donors asking for projects in that area. Leveraging security networks and shared analysis, so making use of INSO, for example, and INGO forum as well, especially for security purposes, essential for staff on the ground, both national and international. Important is also localization, so Intersos is trying to cooperate with the emergency room responses. Then we have adherence. One of the other ideas proposed was adherence to a collective identity and especially a collective response to reinforce the accountability of the overall humanitarian community on the ground. And lastly, advocacy. Advocacy is essential because, as it was already mentioned, Sudan is being internationally neglected, and so events such as this one can help to rebring a little bit of attention to this crisis that is fundamental to be talked about. To conclude, I have drawn some recommendations from Intersos strategies. Basically, again, diversification of funding is essential. Also investing in collective approaches, especially in Sudan, because of the rivalry between the two parties and the fact of having a coordinated overall humanitarian response, so not only Intersos and its partners, but the overall humanitarian community on the ground through, for example, the INGO forum is also essential to reinforce accountability. Community-led models, such as the emergency room responses, should be more fully recognized and funded, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who have always been there and will continue to be there and know the context better than anyone else. And finally, again, sustained advocacy and visibility is key. So I think ultimately Intersos' experience shows that even in a fragmented and underfunded environment such as this one in Sudan, principled humanitarian action can remain possible, but it's not easy, and it must be done so, it must be revisioned, but collectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Arianna. Thank you very much. Indeed, most of the findings resonates with and experience, and there would be a lot to say, but for the sake of time, allow me to go to Safia. Are you still there?
Yes,
excellent. Okay. Thank you, Safa. And I think I will give you directly the floor for introducing this very interesting research that you did with regard to how artificial intelligence is supporting prevention of child recruitment in Sudan, with a particular focus on al-Fashir. And we mentioned the complex situation there in North Darfur. Please, Safa, to you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. It is a pleasure to me to be here and share my paper, Preventing Child Recruitment in Conflict Zones and the Potential and the Pitfalls of Ethical AI in Humanitarian Practices. And this research explores how artificial intelligence can be used responsibly to help prevent the recruitment of children by armed groups. And my motivation came from my earlier field work in North Darfur, where I saw incredible community-led protection efforts, and yet also how existing systems often act too late. And the experience made me wonder, could AI, if guided by strong ethics, help community act earlier, not just respond after harm happens? And that question led this study. So in many conflicts, protection system collapse when poverty, displacement, and insecurity intersects. Humanitarian actors often work with limited information, slow reporting, and restricted access to affected areas. And at the same time, AI is entering humanitarian work all through data analysis, mapping tools, and predictive modules. And these innovations promise faster detection of risk and better resource allocation, but they also bring ethical and legal challenges, such as privacy and accountability and bias. So the real questions becomes, can AI truly help protect children, or it might create new forms of inequality and control? And this intention between potential and risk is what my research seeks to solve. So before going deeper, let me give you a roadmap of these presentations. I will begin by outlining the problem of child recruitment, then present the aim and key questions guiding this study. And after that, we will look at findings, first the opportunities AI brings, and then ethical risks. And then I will introduce a case study from North Darfur, followed by recommendations and brief overviews of my proposal framework, Ethical AI by Design. So let's start with the central issues that shape the entire research. Despite strong international laws, frameworks, such as the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Paris Principles, children continue to be recruited by armed groups. Why? Because during ongoing conflicts, social systems collapse, schools close, livelihoods vanish, and families face impossible choices. For many children, joining armed groups appears to be the only path to protection or survival. And meanwhile, humanitarian responses tend to be reactive, not preventive. And local actors, especially women teachers, have their trust and moral authority to act earlier, but they often lack digital tools that could help them detect risk sooner. So the challenge is this: how can we use technology to strengthen protection without compromising trust, privacy, or human judgment? So the goal of this research is to explore how AI can be ethically and right-based integrated into humanitarian practice to prevent child recruitment. It aims to bridge technology, ethics, and child protection, identifying ways that AI can enhance early warning and decision-making while keeping humanitarian values at the core. So to guide this, I ask three main questions. What opportunities can AI provide to improve early warning and prevention? And what ethical, legal, and operational risks come from using AI in humanitarian settings? And finally, how can these tools be aligned with humanitarian principles and community participation to ensure inequality, accountability, and protection? And these questions guide both the literature review and analysis for the field material. So let's start with the positive side, the opportunities. AI can help humanitarian actors detect risk earlier and act faster. For instance, AI-based early warning systems can combine education, displacement, and security data to predict when and where recruitment risk might increase. In displacement camps, for instance, AI can assist with the case tracking and family reunification when children are separated. It can also support remote learning and psychosocial programs reaching children in hard-to-access areas. Perhaps most importantly, involving local actors in the design of these tools improves both data accuracy and cultural sensitivities. And these findings suggested that when designed responsibly, AI can genuinely complement, but not replace, human action works or human protection works. But alongside this opportunity come serious risks. AI systems are never neutral. They reflect the bias of their creators and their data sets in fragile context that can lead to misclassification or discrimination, putting vulnerable groups at greater risks. So privacy and consent are also major concerns. Community rarely knew how their data is collected or used. And there is the danger also of over-reliance on algorithms when machines start shaping decisions that depends on human judgment and empathies. And finally, AI can deepen empower imbalances. International actors may control technology, while local communities become little more than data sources. And that's why ethical AI and participation must remain central to any humanitarian interventions. So, to ground this idea in the practice, the study examines North Darfur. This region continues to face conflict, poverty, and displacement, and yet community has developed remarkable self-protection systems. Women leaders, along with teachers and elders, act as moral mediators, promising peace and discouraging recruitment. And during consultations, many members express interest in using simple digital tools, for example, sharing alerts or tracking missing children. But they also stress that technology must respect cultural norms, confidentiality, and trust. And this case shows that AI can only succeed when it builds upon community networks, not replacing them. Context, sensitivities, and trust are the foundation for any responsible innovations. So from the research, 6 key recommendations emerged. Adapt ethical AI by design, embedded humanitarian and child rights value from the start, keep human oversights. AI can assist but never replace human responsibilities. Promoting local participations, especially for women, youth, and community leaders. Alliance with legal frameworks like CRC and IHL and the Paris Principles. Build digital literacies within local organizations so they can adapt tool safely and ensure accountability through ethical audits and community feedback loops. And together, these steps help ensure that AI becomes a force for protection, not surveillance or harm. So, the ethical AI by design frameworks brings all these elements together. At its basis are humanitarian principles, such as humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and do not harm. Built on that foundation is the community-centered approach that values participation and inclusion, particularly of women and youth. And the next layers include legal safeguards like the Convention on the Rights of the Child and international humanitarian laws. And these principles guide how AI systems handle data collection, analysis, and decision support, and always under humanitarian supervisions. A feedback loop then connects back to the community, creating a live system that learns, adapts, and remains accountable. So to conclude, technology alone will never solve humanitarian problems. The future of AI in child protection depends entirely on the values that guide its design and use. And AI should be built to protect before it predicts and to serve humanity, not to replace them. So by bringing together ethics, law, and local participation, humanitarian actors can ensure inventions becomes a tool for dignity and preventions, not control. So thank you very much for your attentions. And this is my email address and LinkedIn profile for more connections. Many thanks.
Safa, thank you very much. Very fascinating insight on how these new technology, these new tools can help really advancing on protection issues when the system is collapsed, though there are a lot of risks associated to it, and the fact that the role of the community and the participation is not replaceable at the end of the day. I would like now to thank you again, Safa. Would like to open the floor, perhaps for a few minutes before closing the session today, for any question or input on the two researchers that we had today. So, yes?
No, I'm Kostas, the director of Intersource. No, I would really like to thank the two students for their work and the way they work with our teams in order to produce this research. And definitely, I don't have any question. I know by heart the thesis, no. But really, it was helpful and helpful also for our work. So the collaboration with Santana University will continue, and this kind of support research documents add to our toolkit in order to manage in this complicated situation. It's not a panacea, but it's a good support. Thank you.
Thank you, Kostas, for that. And thank you again also to Scuola Sant'Anna for continuing collaborating with us. Paolo, last word to you. Something, some hope, some direction.
No, thank you very much for both the students, Arianna and Safa, for your studies. Let me say just that listening particularly to Arianna and something that I heard before in the panel before, I believe that complementarity is essential in this kind of crisis. For many things that Arianna highlighted on the impartiality, neutrality, independence, etc., I believe that complementarity among NGOs and among, humanitarian actors is essential to try to tackle the Sudan crisis. This is what I'm taking from the studies and mainly from Arianna. And I also would like to say a word of appreciation to Intersos that is trying to strengthen this idea of complementarity, involving also Sant'Egidio, but many other speakers today, and to look for a solution to this humanitarian crisis. That's all.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you very much, and thank you to all the audience for having stayed in this long day and late afternoon of a Friday with bus strikes. So really heroes we have. And now the last word, last remark to Director General Costas. To you, Costas, the floor.
Okay, so I will be really laconic because everybody had enough of discussion. So there is not a huge conclusion here. What I would like to say, first of all, thanks for everybody who came here, for the panelists who gave their best. I think in terms of quality of debate, I can say that it was the most comprehensive and diverse debate we had in the 4 editions, and we really looked for it. We wanted to have we didn't want to preach to the converted. We wanted to have a debate, and I think to a certain extent we managed it. Next year, hopefully, again here in Arab Patches, we will try even more. We had also for the first time, and it is not by accident, an Italian component in the panels, which for us is becoming more and more important, and collaboration definitely. Paolo was saying that it's one of our aims, or our objectives, and that we consider it here in Intersos from the president of the board. And I would like to tell you that the president of the board is coming back now from Ethiopia, where he was doing an assessment for Intersos as well. That's why he's not here. Yes, collaboration is the easier way ahead. Competition will always be, but if it's healthy and intellectually honest, it is also helping. Competition is not bad by itself. Dirty competition and unhealthy competition is the problem. So, closing, two words only. For us, and I think from everybody who spoke here, it is clear that the only way to go ahead is to keep hold of our principles. Principles exist since quite some years, and it will not be now in discussion in 2 hours or 2 years or in 1 year. Humanitarian principles are really our guideline, and we cannot change them. We can not adapt them. It's a dangerous word to use, adapt. No. Principles are principles. And of course, humanitarians are not bureaucrats or monolithic, so they need to adapt themselves to the reality, but not the principles. The principles are principles. They are not adaptable. They are to be used as such. So principles humanitarian action. I still remember the embedded NGOs in Afghanistan, where after the US-led invasion in 2001, the excuse was, yes, we go embedded with the forces, the military forces, because this is the only way to deliver aid. That was not the only way. And of course, when things changed and Taliban came back, these NGOs had huge issues of access that became a problem for the people, not for the NGOs. The NGOs, it's not a problem if they don't have access. The problem is that people don't have access to services. So that's why principles are not to be touched, not to be changed, and not to be customized to the context. In Ukraine, some principles, they can exist or not exist. In Gaza, others, and in Sudan, others. So it's a matter of legitimacy of our work. So that's why you have to keep strong and to ask for more support in these troubled times until things will change, because things will change. To a better or worse will change, but for the time being, we are navigating through really troubled waters. And I close with, it's not optimistic or positive or whatever, it's realistic. Crisis has good points. The system had a lot of fat, created privileges that now are collapsing, and this is good. Not so as we would like to, but anyway, it's a direction. Of course, if you move your headquarters, people from Geneva to Nairobi, I think this is whitewashing because, of course, Nairobi is even more expensive than Geneva. But I wanted to say that the crisis brings advantages, brings things that you have to change, you are obliged to change, and we had a lot of things to change. I will not enter now in the list of things we have to change. The panelists said it clearly. We need to change, but change is not easy, and nobody wants to change so easily. If he's not forced, she is not forced. Even in our organization, change is difficult, so I don't want to preach to the others. So, but this time, we are living, and I close with I thought a lot of this phrase, so to close in style. We are living in extraordinary times, so we need extraordinary measures. I don't dare to use the word solutions because it's too much, but we need extraordinary measures. And again, thanks for coming, thanks for contributing with questions with the panelists, and we renew our appointment for next year in the same, around the 10th of October, depending on the Friday. And we hope to see you here and even more. Thanks a lot.